Between 1764 and 1767, a wave of terror swept through the rugged countryside of southern France in a region known as Gavardin. Isolated villages, dense forests, and rolling hills formed a landscape both beautiful and unforgiving, a place where superstition and survival were deeply intertwined. It was here that a mysterious predator emerged, a creature that would come to be known as the Beast of Gavardin. Its attacks were brutal, its behavior baffling, and its identity remains one of history's most enduring enigmas. The first recorded attack occurred in the summer of 1764. A young woman tending cattle near the village of Langon reported an encounter with a massive, wolf-like animal, according to her account. The beast charged at her but was driven away by her herd of cows. At the time, the incident seemed unusual but not entirely inexplicable. Wolves were known to roam the countryside, and attacks on livestock were common. However, what followed would quickly shatter any sense of normalcy within weeks. Reports began to surface of violent assaults on villagers, unlike typical wolf attacks. This creature appeared to deliberately hunt humans. Its victims were often women and children, individuals who worked alone in fields or traveled between villages. The killings were savage. Bodies were discovered mutilated, sometimes partially consumed, sometimes left in ways that suggested something more than simple predation. Fear spread rapidly, fueled by whispers and exaggerations that transformed the beast into something almost supernatural. Witness descriptions added to the mystery. Survivors and observers consistently described a creature larger than a typical wolf, with a long, narrow snout, reddish or tawny fur, and a dark stripe running along its back. Some claimed it had an unusually broad chest, powerful jaws, and a tail that ended in a tuft. Others insisted its movements were strange, almost feline rather than canine, and that it seemed unnaturally bold, showing little fear of humans or weapons. As the attacks increased, panic took hold across Gavardin. Villagers began to travel in groups, children were kept indoors, and daily life was reshaped by the constant threat of violence. Churches filled with frightened worshippers seeking protection, while local authorities struggled to respond to a crisis that seemed to defy explanation. The French crown soon became involved. King Louis XV was informed of the situation, and what had begun as a regional problem escalated into a matter of national concern. The king dispatched professional hunters to the region, including experienced wolf hunters tasked with eliminating the threat. Among them was Jean-Charles de Neval, a renowned hunter from Normandy, who arrived with his son and a team of skilled trackers. Hunting the beast, however, proved far more difficult than anyone anticipated. The forests of Gavardin were vast and treacherous, offering countless hiding places. Wolves were abundant in the region, and distinguishing the killer from ordinary animals was nearly impossible. Hunting parties organized large-scale drives, combing through the wilderness and killing dozens, sometimes hundreds of wolves, yet the attacks continued. This persistence deepened the mystery. If the beast were simply a wolf, why did killing so many others have no effect? Some began to speculate that there might be more than one creature involved. Others believed the beast was something entirely different, perhaps a hybrid, a trained animal, or even a supernatural entity sent as punishment or omen. In 1765, the king sent his own royal gun-bearer, Francois Antoine, to take control of the hunt. Antoine was a seasoned marksman and a figure of considerable authority. After months of tracking, he killed a large wolf near the Abbey of Chazes. The animal was enormous, and its appearance seemed to match many of the descriptions provided by witnesses. It was declared the Beast of Gavardin, and its body was preserved and sent to the royal court at Versailles. For a brief moment, it appeared that the nightmare was over. But the relief was short-lived. Within months, new attacks were reported. The killings resumed with the same ferocity as before, undermining the claim that the beast had been slain. Panic returned, perhaps even more intense than before, as the realization set in that the true predator was still at large, or that there had never been just one. Over the next 2 years, the people of Gavardin endured continued terror. The death toll rose, with estimates suggesting that dozens, possibly over 100 people were killed. The exact number is difficult to determine, as records from the time were inconsistent and often influenced by fear and rumor. Nevertheless, the impact on the region was undeniable. Entire communities lived under constant threat, their routines dictated by the movements of an unseen enemy. The final chapter of the story began in 1767. A local hunter named Jean Chastel emerged as a central figure, unlike the royal hunters who had come and gone. Chastel was a resident of the region, familiar with its terrain and wildlife. According to accounts, he joined a hunting party organized by local authorities and eventually encountered the beast near Montmartre. The details of the encounter have taken on a legendary quality. Some stories claim that Chastel used silver bullets, blessed by a priest, to kill the creature, an element that has contributed to the mythic aura surrounding the event. While historians often dismiss this detail as folklore, it reflects the deep sense of fear and superstition that had developed around the beast. What is more certain is that Chastel did kill a large animal believed to be responsible for the attacks. After its death, the killings ceased. Unlike the earlier wolf killed by Francois Antoine, this creature was not sent to Versailles, and detailed records of its examination are scarce. As a result, its true nature was never definitively established. Was it a particularly large wolf? A wolf-dog hybrid? An exotic animal, such as a hyena or lion, that had somehow found its way to rural France? Or was it something else entirely, something shaped as much by fear and imagination as by physical reality? The mystery of the Beast of Gavaudan has endured for over 2 centuries, inspiring countless theories, books, and adaptations. Some researchers argue that the attacks can be explained by a series of unusually aggressive wolves, possibly driven by environmental pressures or habituation to human prey. Others suggest that a single, atypical animal, perhaps suffering from disease or raised in captivity, developed a pattern of hunting humans. More speculative theories venture into darker territory. Some have proposed that the beast was trained by a human, used as a weapon to terrorize the population. A few even suggest the involvement of a serial killer who used animal attacks as a cover for murder. While these ideas remain controversial and largely unsupported by concrete evidence, they highlight the complexity of the case and the difficulty of separating fact from legend. What makes the story of the Beast of Gavaudan so compelling is not just the violence of the attacks, but the uncertainty that surrounds them. Unlike many historical events, there is no clear resolution, no definitive answer that ties together all the details. Instead, the case exists as a blend of documented history and evolving folklore, shaped by the fears and beliefs of those who lived through it. In many ways, the beast reflects the anxieties of its time. 18th century rural France was a place where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were often blurred. Scientific understanding of animal behavior was limited, and unexplained events were frequently interpreted through the lens of religion or superstition. The idea of a monstrous creature stalking the countryside was not just plausible, it was almost expected. Yet even with modern knowledge, the mystery remains difficult to unravel. While it is tempting to dismiss the beast as nothing more than a series of wolf attacks exaggerated by fear, the consistency of certain details, its apparent size, its focus on human victims, its resilience despite extensive hunting suggests that something unusual was indeed at play. The legacy of the Beast of Gavaudan continues to captivate the imagination. It has been the subject of films, literature, and historical investigations, each attempting to reconstruct the events and uncover the truth. But perhaps its enduring power lies in its ambiguity. The beast is not just a creature, it is a question one that challenges our understanding of history, nature, and the stories we tell to make sense of both. In the end, the terror that gripped Gavaudan faded, but the mystery did not. The forests grew quiet once more, the villages returned to their routines, and the memory of the beast became part of local legend. Yet the question remains, echoing through time. What was the Beast of Gavaudan a wolf? A monster? Or something that exists only in the space between reality and fear? No one has ever proven the answer, and perhaps that is why this story endures, because some mysteries refuse to be solved, lingering instead as shadows in the history of human experience. In the late 1960s, a shadow fell over Northern California, an unseen presence that seemed to move without pattern, without warning, and without remorse. This presence would become known as the Zodiac Killer, one of the most infamous and elusive criminals in modern history, unlike many killers before him. The Zodiac did not simply commit his crimes and disappear into obscurity. Instead, he reached out taunting authorities, manipulating the media, and crafting an identity that would haunt investigators and the public for decades. The terror began quietly. On December 20th, 1968, near Lake Herman Road, a young couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were shot while parked in a secluded area. At first, it appeared to be a tragic but isolated act of violence. There were no immediate signs that this crime would mark the beginning of a series. But less than a year later, on July 4th, 1969, another attack occurred at Blue Rock Springs Park. This time, the victims were Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mago. Ferrin died from her injuries, but Mago survived and provided a description of the attacker, though it was vague and offered little help in identifying the man responsible. What made this second attack different was what followed. Shortly after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department, calmly reporting the crime and taking responsibility not only for the recent attack, but also for the earlier murders at Lake Herman Road. The caller spoke in a measured tone, almost detached, as if describing something trivial. This chilling communication marked the beginning of a new phase one in which the killer sought recognition and control through direct interaction with authorities and the public. In August 1969, several newspapers, including the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received letters from someone claiming to be the killer. Each letter contained a portion of a cryptogram-coded message made up of strange symbols and characters. The writer demanded that the letters be published on the front page, threatening further violence if his demands were not met. The newspapers complied. Amateur code breakers and curious citizens quickly turned their attention to the cryptograms. Within days, a high school teacher and his wife managed to decipher one of them. It was not just a confession, it was a manifesto of cruelty, one that transformed the killer into something more than a criminal. He became a symbol of fear, someone who seemed to revel in the attention and chaos he created. It was in a subsequent letter that the killer first referred to himself as Zodiac. He included a symbol, a circle crossed by two lines, resembling a gun sight that would become his signature. This symbol appeared in later communications and became synonymous with the case itself. The Zodiac had effectively branded his crimes, turning them into a dark narrative that the public could follow, even as authorities struggled to stop him. The attacks continued. On September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa, a couple named Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking when a man approached them wearing an executioner-style hood marked with the Zodiac symbol. Unlike previous attacks, this one involved a knife. The assailant bound the victims before stabbing them multiple times. Shepard later died from her injuries, while Hartnell survived and provided a detailed account of the encounter. The attacker even wrote a message on the victim's car door, listing previous murders and including the now familiar Zodiac symbol. Just weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the city. A taxi driver named Paul Stein was shot in the head in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. This murder differed from the earlier attacks in both location and method, suggesting that the killer was unpredictable and willing to change his approach. Witnesses saw a man leaving the scene, and a police radio error reportedly led officers to search for a black suspect instead of a white one, allowing the Zodiac to escape. Following the Stein murder, the Zodiac's letters became even more frequent and increasingly bizarre. He sent pieces of Stein's blood-stained shirt to newspapers as proof of his involvement. He wrote about plans to target school buses, describing in detail how he might carry out such an attack. Whether these threats were genuine or intended purely to instill fear remains unclear, but they succeeded in spreading panic throughout the region. One of the most enduring mysteries of the case lies in the Zodiac ciphers. While some of his coded messages have been solved, Others remain undeciphered to this day. These cryptograms have attracted the attention of professional cryptographers, amateur enthusiasts, and even computer scientists, all attempting to unlock their secrets. The complexity of the codes and the possibility that they may contain clues to the killer's identity has kept interest in the case alive for decades. Despite extensive investigations involving multiple law enforcement agencies, the Zodiac killer was never identified. Thousands of suspects were considered over the years, including individuals with criminal backgrounds, military experience, or connections to the crime scenes. One of the most prominent suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, but evidence against him was ultimately inconclusive. DNA testing, handwriting analysis, and fingerprint comparisons failed to produce a definitive match. The case grew colder with time, but it never disappeared. In fact, the legend of the Zodiac killer only expanded. Books, documentaries, and films have explored the mystery, each offering new theories and interpretations. One of the most notable portrayals came in the film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, which presented a detailed and methodical account of the investigation and the obsession it inspired. What sets the Zodiac killer apart from other serial criminals is not just the brutality of his actions, but the way he manipulated perception. He understood the power of media and used it to amplify his presence. By communicating directly with newspapers and police, he inserted himself into the narrative, ensuring that his crimes would not be forgotten. He turned fear into a form of currency, one that allowed him to control the conversation even in his absence. The psychological impact of the Zodiac's actions cannot be overstated. For residents of Northern California during that time, everyday activities going on a date, driving at night, sitting in a parked car became sources of anxiety. The idea that a killer could strike anywhere, at any time, created a pervasive sense of vulnerability. And because the Zodiac was never caught, that fear never fully dissipated. In recent years, advances in forensic technology have renewed interest in the case. DNA analysis, in particular, has provided new avenues for investigation. Some researchers have attempted to extract genetic material from the Zodiac's letters and compare it to modern databases. While these efforts have yielded potential leads, none have resulted in a confirmed identification. The possibility remains that the killer's identity may still be uncovered, but as time passes, that prospect becomes increasingly uncertain. The Zodiac killer remains a paradox of figure both known and unknown. His words are preserved, his symbols recognized, his crimes documented in detail. Yet his face, his name, and his true identity remain hidden. This duality is what continues to captivate the public imagination. He is not just a criminal case. He is a mystery that resists resolution. More than half a century later, the question still lingers: who is the Zodiac killer? Was he a lone individual driven by a desire for power and recognition? Or was there something more complex behind his actions? Without definitive answers, the case exists in a space between history and legend, where facts and speculation intertwine. And perhaps that is the most unsettling aspect of all, not just that the Zodiac killer was never caught, but that he succeeded in creating something that endures, a story without an ending, a voice without a face, a shadow that, even now, refuses to fade.
In the turbulent late 1960s, as the United States grappled with social change, protest movements, and cultural upheaval, a shadowy figure emerged in Northern California, one who would become one of the most infamous, unidentified criminals in American history. Known only by a chilling, self-assigned name, the Zodiac Killer case. This unknown individual carried out a series of calculated attacks and then taunted authorities and the public with cryptic messages that remain partially unsolved to this day. A killer emerges in Northern California. The Zodiac Killer's crimes began in 1968 in the quiet outskirts of Vallejo. On the night of December 20th, a young couple parked along a secluded road became the first known victims. The attacker approached their vehicle under the cover of darkness and opened fire. The brutality of the act shocked the local community, but at the time, it seemed like an isolated tragedy, one of many violent incidents that could be explained by robbery or personal motive. But the killings did not stop. Months later, in July 1969, another couple was attacked in a similar manner at a remote location. This time, however, one of the victims survived long enough to provide a description of the assailant. The pattern was beginning to take shape. Young couples, isolated settings, nighttime ambushes. There was no clear motive, only a sense of deliberate targeting and control. The case began to spread beyond local concern. Fear quietly settled over parts of Northern California, especially among young people who frequented lovers' lanes and remote scenic spots. The letters that changed everything. The investigation took a dramatic turn when newspapers in the nearby city of San Francisco received a series of letters, written in a disturbingly calm tone. The author claimed responsibility for the murders and demanded that his messages be published on the front pages. If his demands were not met, he threatened further violence. What set these letters apart was not just their content, but their complexity. Each envelope contained a portion of a cipher-coded message made up of symbols, letters, and patterns that seemed designed to challenge anyone who tried to decipher it. The sender signed the letters with a strange symbol, a circle with a cross through it, resembling a gun sight. Soon, the author gave himself a name, Zodiac. One of the most infamous lines from his correspondence read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The statement was chilling, not only for its lack of remorse, but for the almost casual tone in which it was delivered. It suggested a person who not only committed violent acts, but derived satisfaction from the fear and attention they generated. Code ciphers and cryptic messages. The Zodiac ciphers became one of the most enduring elements of the case. Amateur codebreakers, professional cryptographers, and curious citizens all attempted to solve the puzzles. One of the earliest ciphers, composed of 408 symbols, was eventually decoded by a schoolteacher and his wife. The message revealed a rambling confession in which the killer described his enjoyment of murder and hinted at collecting victims as slaves for the afterlife. However, not all the codes were solved. Some remain mysteries to this day, their meanings locked behind layers of symbolism and possible misdirection. The Zodiac seemed to relish this aspect of his persona crafting, not just crimes, but riddles that would keep people guessing long after the immediate danger had passed. His letters were often accompanied by threats, boasting, and taunts directed at law enforcement. He mocked the police for their inability to catch him and occasionally included details that suggested inside knowledge of the investigations. Escalation and public panic. As the Zodiac continued his campaign, his methods evolved. In September 1969, a couple relaxing near a lake was approached by a man wearing a dark hooded costume emblazoned with his now infamous symbol. Unlike previous attacks, this one involved a knife rather than a firearm, adding a new layer of terror to the case. The attacker bound the victims before stabbing them repeatedly. One survived, providing further testimony that helped shape the composite sketch of the suspect. The image depicted a stocky white male with short hair and glasses, ordinary in appearance, yet capable of extraordinary violence. The sense of fear spread rapidly. The Zodiac was no longer just a local threat. He had become a regional nightmare. Parents warned their children, couples avoided isolated areas, and the public followed every development in the newspapers with a mix of dread and fascination. The murder in the city in October 1969, the Zodiac's boldness reached a new level. In the heart of San Francisco, a taxi driver was shot and killed in what appeared to be a robbery. However, the Zodiac soon claimed responsibility, providing details that only the killer could have known. This attack marked a shift. No longer confined to remote areas, the Zodiac had demonstrated that he could strike in an urban environment, in plain sight, and escape without being caught. The randomness of his actions made him even more frightening. there were no clear patterns that could guarantee safety. Police came close to apprehending a suspect shortly after the murder, but a miscommunication led officers to mistakenly search for a different individual. By the time the error was corrected, the killer had vanished. Endless suspects. No answers over the decades. The Zodiac killer case has generated thousands of leads and suspects. Some were investigated extensively, their backgrounds scrutinized for any connection to the crimes. Others emerged later, proposed by independent researchers or journalists who believed they had uncovered new evidence. One of the challenges in identifying the Zodiac lies in the fragmented nature of the evidence. While there are fingerprints, handwriting samples, and witness descriptions, none have conclusively matched a single individual. Advances in forensic science, including DNA analysis, have been applied to the case, but results have been inconclusive or disputed. The passage of time has only complicated matters. Many of the people involved, witnesses, investigators, and potential suspects, are no longer alive. Physical evidence has degraded, and memories have faded. The media's role in the myth from the beginning, the Zodiac understood the power of media. His letters were not just confessions. They were performances. By communicating directly with newspapers, he ensured that his message would reach a wide audience, amplifying the fear he created. The press, in turn, played a significant role in shaping the public's perception of the case. Headlines emphasized the mystery and horror, while detailed accounts of the letters and ciphers invited readers to become part of the investigation. Over time, the Zodiac killer became more than a criminal. He became a symbol. Books, films, and documentaries have revisited the case repeatedly, each offering new interpretations and theories. The story has been retold so many times that it exists somewhere between history and legend. A mind behind the mystery. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Zodiac case is the glimpse it offers into the mind of the killer. His writings suggest a person who craved attention and control, someone who saw himself as intellectually superior to those pursuing him. The use of codes and symbols indicates a desire to challenge and manipulate. Whether these ciphers were meant to conceal information or simply to create confusion is still debated. Some experts believe the Zodiac intentionally included errors or meaningless patterns to frustrate those attempting to decode his messages. His language, often grandiose and theatrical, reveals a personality that thrived on notoriety. The killings alone were not enough. They had to be accompanied by recognition, by a sense of being seen and feared. The silence that followed by the early 1970s, the Zodiac's communications became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Whether this was due to death, imprisonment for unrelated crimes, or a deliberate decision to disappear remains unknown. The absence of new messages did not bring closure. Instead, it left a void, an unfinished story that continues to invite speculation. Why the mystery endures more than half a century later, the Zodiac killer remains unidentified. The case endures not just because of its brutality, but because of its unresolved nature. It challenges the assumption that every crime can be solved, that every mystery has an answer waiting to be uncovered. There is also a psychological dimension to its persistence. The idea of a killer who could operate in plain sight, taunt authorities, and then vanish without a trace is deeply unsettling. It speaks to fears about randomness, vulnerability, and the limits of control. A legacy without closure. The Zodiac killer's legacy is one of unanswered questions. Who was he? How many victims did he truly claim? What became of him? These questions remain open, their answers hidden somewhere in the past. What is certain is the impact he left behind: trail of fear, a collection of cryptic messages, and a case that continues to captivate investigators and the public alike. The Zodiac killer is not just a figure from history. He is a reminder that some shadows, once cast, never fully disappear. In the quiet suburban borough of Enfield, an ordinary council house became the center of one of the most debated paranormal cases in modern British history. What began as a series of strange noises in the late 1970s would soon spiral into a phenomenon that attracted investigators, journalists, skeptics, and believers from around the world. The case would come to be known as the Enfield poltergeist, a story that still divides opinion decades later. A normal family, an unusual beginning. The events unfolded in 1977, inside a modest home, occupied by Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children. Life for the family was not especially remarkable. Like many households at the time, they navigated financial struggles, school routines, and the everyday pressures of life in London. Nothing in their background suggested they would soon become the focus of international attention. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Late at night, the children began hearing persistent knocking sounds coming from the walls of their shared bedroom. At first, these noises were dismissed as pipes, drafts, or the natural creaks of an aging house. But as the nights passed, the sounds grew louder, more deliberate, and increasingly difficult to explain. Furniture began to shift. Chairs slid across the floor without being touched. A chest of drawers reportedly moved on its own, resisting attempts by multiple people to hold it in place. These incidents unsettled the family, especially the children, who felt as though something unseen was watching, or worse, interacting with them. Escalation into the unexplainable. Within days, the disturbances intensified. Objects were said to fly across rooms without warning. Toys, books, and household items would suddenly lift into the air and crash against walls. The activity seemed unpredictable, often occurring in bursts of chaos, followed by eerie silence. The 2 daughters, particularly 11-year-old Janet, became central figures in the unfolding events. According to their accounts, the phenomenon did not simply occur around them, it seemed to focus on them. Janet reported being pulled from her bed by an invisible force, lifted into the air, and thrown across the room. Her siblings described similar experiences, claiming they witnessed her levitating in the darkness. These claims alarmed not only the family, but also neighbors, who were called in to witness the strange happenings. Some reported seeing chairs move on their own, or hearing loud, unexplained bangs echoing through the house. The situation escalated to the point where the police were contacted. Official attention and public fascination. When officers arrived at the house, they reportedly observed a chair moving without any visible cause. While they could not provide an explanation, the incident added credibility to the family's claims and marked a turning point in the case. What had been a private ordeal now began to attract broader attention. Soon, the story reached the press. Newspapers published sensational accounts of the haunting, drawing crowds of curious onlookers to the quiet street. The house in Enfield became a spectacle, with reporters eager to capture evidence of the supernatural. Amid this growing attention, members of the Society for Psychical Research stepped in to investigate. Among them was Maurice Gross, who had spent months documenting the events, often staying overnight in the house. Later, he was joined by Guy Lyon Playfair, another prominent researcher with a deep interest in unexplained phenomena. Months of investigation. Gross and Playfair approached the case with a combination of curiosity and caution. They installed recording equipment, conducted interviews, and attempted to document every reported incident. Over time, they amassed hours of audio recordings and numerous written accounts. One of the most controversial aspects of the case emerged during this period: the phenomenon of voice. Janet appeared to produce a deep, gruff voice that claimed to belong to a deceased man. The voice spoke in short phrases, often in response to questions, and seemed to operate independently of Janet's normal speech. Medical examinations suggested that producing such a voice would be physically difficult without causing strain or damage. yet Janet appeared capable of sustaining it for extended periods. Supporters of the haunting viewed this as compelling evidence of possession or external influence, while skeptics argued it could be a form of ventriloquism or deliberate trickery. Evidence, doubt, and controversies. The investigation continued. The Enfield case became increasingly polarizing. On one hand, there were numerous witnesses, including journalists and researchers, who claimed to have experienced or observed unexplained events firsthand. On the other hand, there were moments that raised serious doubts. Some incidents were caught on camera, but critics pointed out that photographs could be misleading. For example, images of Janet appearing to levitate were later interpreted by skeptics as staged jumps captured midair. In a few instances, the children were reportedly caught bending spoons or attempting to recreate phenomena when they thought they were unobserved. These revelations fueled skepticism. Critics argued that at least part of the haunting could be attributed to pranks or exaggeration, possibly driven by a desire for attention or the influence of media coverage. However, even some skeptics acknowledged that not all reported events could be easily explained. Playfair himself admitted that while certain incidents may have been fabricated, he believed a core of genuine, unexplained activity remained. This ambiguity only deepened the mystery, leaving the case suspended between belief and doubt. The emotional toll amid the debate over authenticity, the human impact of the events is often overlooked. Constant disturbances, the presence of investigators and journalists, and the scrutiny of the public took a significant emotional toll. The children, in particular, lived under intense pressure. Their accounts were questioned, analyzed, and sometimes dismissed. Whether the events were supernatural, psychological, or a combination of factors, the fear they experienced was undeniably real. Peggy Hodgson struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy for her family while dealing with the chaos unfolding around them. The house, once a place of safety, had become a source of anxiety and uncertainty. Gradual decline of activity. After months of intense activity, the disturbances began to subside. By 1979, the most dramatic incidents had largely ceased, though occasional unexplained occurrences were still reported. As quickly as the phenomenon had escalated, it seemed to fade, leaving behind more questions than answers. Investigators concluded their work, publishing reports and books that documented their findings. The Enfield poltergeist case became a reference point in discussions of paranormal activity, often cited as one of the most well-documented poltergeist cases in history. Legacy and cultural impact over the years. The story of the Enfield poltergeist has been retold in documentaries, books, and films. It has inspired fictional adaptations, most notably its portrayal in modern horror cinema, which introduced the case to new generations. The enduring fascination with the case lies in its complexity. Unlike simpler ghost stories, the Enfield haunting resists easy classification. It exists in a gray area where psychological factors, environmental influences, and the possibility of genuine paranormal activity intersect. Between belief and skepticism, what makes the Enfield poltergeist case so compelling is not just the phenomena reported, but the uncertainty surrounding it. There is evidence that suggests something unusual occurred. Witness, testimonies, recordings, and documented observations. At the same time, there are credible arguments that some elements were exaggerated or fabricated. This duality has kept the case alive in public discourse. Believers point to the consistency of accounts and the involvement of reputable investigators. Skeptics highlight the instances of deception and the lack of definitive proof. An unanswered question nearly half a century later, the events in that modest house in Enfield remain unresolved. Was it a genuine case of paranormal activity? A psychological phenomenon fueled by stress and attention? A combination of truth and fabrication? There is no single answer that satisfies everyone. What remains is the story, a chilling account of a family caught in something they could not fully understand, a case that blurred the line between reality and the unknown. The Enfield poltergeist endures not because it was proven, but because it wasn't. It continues to invite questions, challenge assumptions, and remind us that some mysteries resist even our best attempts at explanation. Hollywood, 1947, a city of dreams. But for one young woman, it became the setting for a real-life nightmare. This is the story of the Black Dahlia, a case that has haunted Los Angeles for over 75 years. Our story begins with Elizabeth Short. Born in Boston in 1924, she was a striking young woman with raven black hair, porcelain skin, and a captivating smile. Like so many others, she was drawn to the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, hoping to make her mark as an actress. She drifted between cities, working odd jobs as a waitress, always chasing that elusive big break. Friends described her as a sweet, somewhat naive dreamer, a girl who loved movies and fashion, often seen wearing black dresses and flowers in her hair. It was this signature style that would posthumously earn her the nickname, the Black Dahlia. A moniker coined by the press, likely inspired by the film noir The Blue Dahlia, which was popular at the time. In the winter of 1946, Elizabeth was living in Los Angeles, floating between cheap hotels and acquaintances' apartments. She was last seen alive on the evening of January 9th, 1947. At the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA, what happened in the 6 days that followed remains a complete mystery. Then, on the morning of January 15th, a local mother out for a walk with her child in the Leimert Park neighborhood made a gruesome discovery. At first, she thought she was looking at a discarded mannequin in a vacant lot. But as she got closer, the horrific reality set in. It was the body of a woman, severed clean in half at the waist. The body had been drained of all its blood and meticulously cleaned. The face was slashed from the corners of the mouth to the ears, creating a grotesque, permanent grin known as a Glasgow smile. The internal organs had been surgically removed, and there were other marks of extreme torture. The scene was so pristine, so devoid of blood, that investigators knew she had been killed elsewhere, and her body carefully placed there for all to see. The victim was soon identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. The sheer brutality and theatrical nature of the crime sent shockwaves through Los Angeles and the entire country. The LAPD launched one of the largest manhunts in its history. Every detective in the city was pulled onto the case. They interviewed hundreds, then thousands, of potential witnesses and suspects. The list included acquaintances, former boyfriends, medical students, and even Hollywood figures. The media frenzy was unlike anything seen before. Newspapers, locked in a circulation war, sensationalized every detail. They published Elizabeth's personal letters, painted her as a promiscuous party girl, and ran speculative, often baseless, stories. This flood of misinformation only complicated the investigation, leading to a deluge of false leads and fake confessions. Over 60 people, mostly men, seeking a twisted form of attention, confessed to the murder. Each one was thoroughly investigated and ultimately cleared. About a week after the body was found, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner received a package. Inside were Elizabeth Short's Social Security card, her birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with some pages torn out. The items had been wiped clean with gasoline to remove any fingerprints. The sender also included a note, pieced together from newspaper clippings, that read, "Here are Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." More letters did follow. They were taunting, rambling, and promised to turn himself in, but he never did. The writer claimed responsibility for the crime, but the letters provided no new evidence that only the killer would know. Was this the real murderer playing a twisted game, or just another cruel prankster capitalizing on the tragedy? The police could never be certain. The investigation focused on several key suspects over the years. One was a man named Robert Red Manley, the last person known to have seen Elizabeth alive. He was a married salesman who gave her a ride to the Biltmore Hotel. He was questioned extensively and passed a polygraph test. And police eventually ruled him out, though his name always remained linked to the case. Another prominent suspect was Dr. George Hodel, his own son, a former LAPD homicide detective named Steve Hodel. Later became convinced his father was the killer. Steve Hodel presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence. His father had surgical training, a high IQ, and a known sadistic streak. Handwriting experts suggested a match between Dr. Hodel's writing and the taunting notes. A police surveillance recording from Hodel's home captured him saying something incriminating. "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Despite this, George Hodel was never charged. He had powerful friends and left the country for several years, effectively evading further scrutiny. The list of suspects goes on and on. Each theory is a rabbit hole of its own, filled with tantalizing clues that lead nowhere. Was it a jealous lover? A spurned acquaintance? A mad doctor with a flair for the dramatic? Or a complete stranger who saw a vulnerable young woman and seized a horrific opportunity? The files on the Black Dahlia case remain officially open at the LAPD. It's a chilling testament to the fact that even with intense media coverage and a massive police effort, a killer can simply vanish. The mystery has become a part of Los Angeles folklore, inspiring countless books, movies, and TV shows. It represents the dark side of the Hollywood dream. A cautionary tale about a city that can build you up just as easily as it can tear you apart. Elizabeth Short came to LA looking for fame. In the most tragic way imaginable, she found it. Her name is now synonymous not with movie stardom, but with one of the most infamous and perplexing unsolved crimes in American history. Her life was brutally cut short, but her story endures a ghostly echo in the City of Angels, forever asking the question that has no answer: who killed the Black Dahlia? Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by mysteries like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. See you in the next video. In the winter of 1959, 10 experienced hikers, mostly students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, set out on a challenging expedition into the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. Their goal was to reach Odorton Mountain, a trek classified as a Category 3, the most difficult for that season. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyadlov, the group was skilled, spirited, and ready for adventure. They documented their journey with diaries and cameras, capturing moments of camaraderie and the stark, frozen beauty of their surroundings. Little did they know, their journey would become one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries of the 20th century. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to illness, a decision that would ultimately save his life. The remaining 9 pressed on, venturing into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. On February 1st, deteriorating weather conditions, including a blizzard and plummeting temperatures, forced the group off their planned route. They ended up on the slopes of a mountain known as Kalatsiakal, which translates from the local Mansi language as Dead Mountain. It was here they decided to make camp for the night, a fatal decision made under extreme pressure. Their last photographs show them digging into the snow to pitch their tent, battling the fierce wind. They were scheduled to send a telegram from their destination by February 12th. When that date came and went with no word, concern began to grow. A search party was assembled, but what they would eventually find was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. On February 26th, the search team discovered the hikers' abandoned tent. It was badly damaged and, perplexingly, had been sliced open from the inside. It was clear the group had fled in a hurry, leaving behind their coats, shoes, and all their supplies in sub-zero temperatures. Leading away from the tent were sets of footprints, some from bare feet, some with only socks, heading down the slope towards a nearby forest. It was a scene of pure panic. Why would seasoned hikers cut their way out of their only shelter and run into a deadly blizzard so unprepared? This was the first deeply unsettling question in a long chain of bizarre discoveries that would follow. The first two bodies, Yuri Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko, were found under a large cedar tree about a mile from the camp. They were dressed only in their underwear. Nearby were the remnants of a small fire. It seemed they had desperately tried to stay warm. The branches of the cedar tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had tried to climb it, perhaps to get a better view of the camp or to escape from something. A short distance away, 3 more bodies were discovered: Igor Dialov, Zenata Komogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They were found at separate points between the cedar tree and the camp, their positions suggesting they had been trying to return to the tent. The scene was tragic, but the initial cause of death for all 5 was ruled as hypothermia. The real horror was yet to be unearthed. It took more than 2 months for the remaining 4 hikers to be found. In May, as the snow began to melt, their bodies were discovered in a ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow, about 75 meters from the cedar tree. And this is where the mystery deepens into something truly terrifying. Unlike the first 5, these hikers had suffered massive internal injuries. Ludmila Dubanina and Semyon Zolotaryov had crushed chests, with fractures similar to those caused by a major car crash. Nikolai Thibobrignol had a fractured skull. Yet bizarrely, there were no corresponding external wounds. Even stranger, Dubanina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lip. Zolotaryev was missing his eyes. The last hiker, Alexander Kolevatov, had no major injuries besides those common with hypothermia. What could have inflicted such catastrophic, yet selective, internal trauma? The official Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. The case was abruptly closed and the files were classified. For decades, the area around Kolotsiakl was off-limits to tourists and investigators. This secrecy, combined with the bizarre evidence, fueled a firestorm of speculation. Theories ranged from the plausible to the paranormal. One of the most common early theories was an attack by the local Mansi people, resentful of the hikers encroaching on their land. However, the investigation found no evidence of other people being present, and the nature of the injuries didn't align with the human attack. This theory was quickly dismissed by the lead investigator himself. Another prominent theory involves a slab avalanche. Proponents suggest that a slab of snow slid down onto the tent, causing the hikers to panic, cut their way out, and flee. The internal injuries could have been caused by the crushing weight of the snow. While this explains the panic and some of the injuries, it has its own problems. The campsite wasn't on a particularly steep slope, and investigators at the time found no signs of an avalanche. Furthermore, why would the hikers run downhill, away from their supplies, instead of digging them out? And it doesn't explain the missing soft tissues or other strange findings. In 2021, a new study using advanced modeling suggested a small, delayed slab avalanche could be a plausible trigger, but it remains a debated topic among researchers. Then we enter the realm of more unusual explanations. Was it a military weapons test gone wrong? The area was rumored to be used for secret Soviet military exercises. Some reports from other locals mentioned seeing strange orange spheres or lights in the sky around the time of the incident. This theory suggests the hikers may have been accidentally killed by a concussive blast from a parachute, mine, or another experimental weapon, which could explain the powerful internal injuries without external signs of impact. Some of the hikers' clothing was also found to be slightly radioactive. Though the levels were low, and could have had an environmental source. This theory, however, lacks any official confirmation and relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and hearsay. Finally, there are the more fringe but persistent theories. From infrasound-induced panic caused by a specific wind pattern called a Kármán vortex street, to an encounter with an unknown creature like a Yeti or even extraterrestrial involvement. The infrasound theory suggests that low-frequency sound waves, inaudible to the human ear, could have created intense feelings of nausea, panic, and dread, causing the group to flee their tent irrationally. While scientifically interesting, it's hard to prove and doesn't fully account for the severe physical trauma. The more outlandish theories, while captivating, lack any credible evidence but persist, because the known facts are just so strange that they seem to defy a simple, rational explanation. 60 years after the tragedy, in 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case. Their investigation focused on natural phenomena, examining theories like an avalanche, a snow slab, or a hurricane. Their final conclusion, announced in 2020, was that an avalanche was the most likely cause, forcing the group from their tent. Poor visibility then caused them to get lost, and they ultimately froze to death. They dismissed the criminal and military theories. However, this conclusion hasn't satisfied everyone. It leaves many questions unanswered. The precise nature of the devastating internal injuries, the missing tongue and eyes, the radioactive traces, and why experienced hikers would make such basic survival errors. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a haunting enigma, a chilling tale of 9 lives lost in the icy grip of the Ural Mountains. The mystery endures, not because of a lack of theories, but because no single theory can satisfyingly explain all the bizarre, terrifying pieces of this tragic puzzle. Thanks for watching. If you find these kinds of mysteries as fascinating as I do, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the unknown.
In the early summer of 1912, the peaceful farming community of Valiska, a small town in the American Midwest, was shaken by a crime so brutal and mysterious that it would haunt the town for generations. What happened during the night of June 9, 1912 would become known as the Valiska Axe murders, a chilling case that remains unsolved more than a century later. The horrifying discovery inside a modest White House on East 2nd Street left the entire nation stunned and sparked one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in American history. Valiska was the kind of town where everyone knew each other. Families left their doors unlocked. Neighbors trusted one another, and crime was almost unheard of. Life revolved around church gatherings and farming work. Among the respected members of the community was Josiah Moore, successful businessman who owned a local store. He lived in a comfortable home with his wife Sarah and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. The Moore family was known for their kindness and involvement in community life. On Sunday, June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended the evening service at their local Presbyterian church. Like many families in Valiska, they spent the evening socializing with friends and neighbors after the service. That night, the young sisters Ina and Lena Stellinger asked if they could stay overnight with the Moore children. Sleepovers were common in the friendly town, and the Moore parents agreed. After church, the group returned home, likely talking and laughing as they walked through the quiet streets. Under the dim glow of street lamps, no one could have imagined that the house they entered that night would soon become the scene of a nightmare sometime after midnight. While the household slept peacefully, an unknown intruder entered the Moore home. Investigators later believed the killer may have hidden in the house earlier in the evening, waiting patiently until everyone had fallen asleep. The weapon used in the murders was an axe belonging to the Moore family, taken from their own shed. One by one, the killer moved through the house in the darkness. The first victims were Josiah and Sarah Moore, who were sleeping in their bedroom on the first floor. The attacker struck them repeatedly with the blunt side of the axe, delivering devastating blows to their heads. The violence was so extreme that it shocked even the most experienced investigators of the time. After killing the parents, the murderer climbed the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor where the children slept. In the bedrooms upstairs were the 4 more children and the 2 Stellinger sisters. The killer moved silently from bed to bed, attacking each sleeping child. None of the victims appeared to have fought back, suggesting they were asleep or unconscious when the fatal blows were delivered. By the time the killer left the house, 8 innocent people had been murdered. But the horror did not end there. When investigators arrived the next morning, they discovered several disturbing details that made the crime even more baffling. Mirrors throughout the house had been covered with clothing or cloth. Windows were also covered, as if the killer did not want to see their own reflection or allow anyone to look inside. This strange behavior puzzled authorities and led to endless speculation about the psychology of the murderer. Another eerie detail was discovered near the murder weapon. The axe used in the killings had been carefully cleaned and placed in the guest bedroom, where the Stilliner girls had been sleeping. Nearby, investigators found a slab of bacon that had been taken from a Moore family kitchen and left beside the axe. To this day, no one knows why the killer placed the bacon there, and the bizarre action only added to the mystery surrounding the case. The murders were not discovered until the following morning. When the Moore family failed to appear for their daily routines, neighbors became concerned. One neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed that the house was unusually quiet and that the family had not begun their morning chores. Eventually, another neighbor entered the house to check on them. What they found inside was beyond horrifying. The bodies were discovered in their beds, the room stained with blood. The scene was so disturbing that the person who discovered it quickly fled the house and alerted authorities. Soon, the small town was filled with panic as word spread that an entire family had been slaughtered in their own home. The investigation quickly drew national attention. Detectives, journalists, and curious onlookers poured into Villisca. However, the investigation was plagued by mistakes from the very beginning. Before investigators could properly secure the crime scene, dozens of townspeople had already entered the house, contaminating potential evidence. At the time, forensic science was still in its early stages. Fingerprinting and modern investigative techniques were not widely used, making it extremely difficult to identify suspects. Despite interviewing numerous individuals and exploring several theories, authorities struggled to find any solid leads. Over the years, several suspects were considered. One of the most famous suspects was a traveling preacher named George Kelly. Kelly had been in the Villisca area around the time of the murders and had a history of mental instability. Authorities arrested him after he made several strange statements that appeared to connect him to the crime. At one point, Kelly even confessed to the murders, claiming that he heard voices from God commanding him to kill. However, the confession quickly fell apart. Investigators realized that Kelly's statements were inconsistent and likely influenced by intense interrogation. Eventually, he was put on trial twice, but both trials ended without a conviction. Many people believed Kelly had been pressured into confessing to a crime he did not commit. Other suspects included a local businessman who reportedly had a personal grudge against Josiah Moore. Rumors circulated that Moore had been involved in a business dispute that might have motivated revenge. Yet investigators were never able to find evidence strong enough to prove the theory. Another chilling possibility was that the Villisca murders were committed by a serial killer who traveled by train across the country. Some researchers have pointed out similarities between the Villisca murders and several other axe murders that occurred in the United States during the early 1900s. In many of these cases, entire families were killed in their sleep, often with axes found at the victims' homes. Despite countless investigations, interrogations, and theories, the truth behind the murders was never discovered. As time passed, the Villisca axe murders became one of the most famous unsolved crimes in American history. The tragedy left deep emotional scars on the community. Families locked their doors at night for the first time, and the sense of safety that once defined the small town was permanently shattered. The Moore house itself still stands today, preserved as a historical site. Over the decades, T has gained a reputation as one of the most haunted locations in the United States. It has gained a reputation as one of the most haunted locations in the United States. Visitors and paranormal investigators claim to experience strange phenomena inside the home. Some people report hearing children's laughter echoing down the hallway late at night. Others say they hear footsteps moving across the wooden floors even when no one else is present. Doors sometimes open and close on their own, and visitors have claimed to feel sudden cold spots or unexplained touches. Paranormal investigators often spend the night in the house, hoping to capture evidence of supernatural activity. Electronic recording devices have allegedly picked up mysterious voices, and some guests say they have seen shadowy figures in the bedrooms where the children were murdered. Whether these experiences are the result of imagination, psychological suggestion, or something truly unexplained remains a subject of debate. However, the chilling history of the house certainly adds to its eerie atmosphere. More than 100 years after the murders, the Valiska axe murders continue to fascinate historians, criminologists, and mystery enthusiasts. Books, documentaries, and television programs have attempted to unravel the mystery, yet none have been able to provide definitive answers. The tragedy of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters remains a haunting reminder of how quickly safety can be shattered and how some mysteries may never be solved. In the quiet town of Valiska, the White House on East 2nd Street still stands as a silent witness to the events of that terrible night in 1912. Though the killer was never identified, the story lives on, whispered in history books, read by investigators, and remembered by those who seek to understand one of the darkest chapters in American crime.
At the edge of a quiet countryside road stood a small stone bridge that most travelers crossed without thinking twice. It was not famous, not especially old compared to many historic structures, and not particularly large. Built from heavy gray stones and shaped in a gentle arch over a narrow stream, it looked much like hundreds of other rural bridges scattered across the region. Yet there was something strange about it. No matter the season, no matter the weather, the surface of the bridge was always damp. On scorching summer afternoons, when the surrounding pavement cracked with dryness and heat shimmered above the road, the bridge remained darkened with moisture. The stones glistened slightly, as if they had just been sprayed with water. Drivers sometimes noticed it when sunlight reflected off the surface. Cyclists felt it under their tires when the road suddenly changed texture. Walkers stepping onto the bridge often paused, puzzled by the faint coolness under their shoes. The surrounding road would be dry enough to collect dust, but the bridge itself was wet, and no one could explain why. A curious observation for years, the damp bridge was little more than a curiosity among local residents. Farmers who drove their trucks across it daily noticed the difference but assumed it had something to do with the nearby stream. Probably just moisture coming up from the ground, some would say. Others guessed the stones absorbed water from the air at night. But the mystery grew deeper during particularly hot summers. During heat waves, when weeks passed without rain, every surface in the area turned pale and dusty. Even the stream running beneath the bridge sometimes shrank to a trickle. Yet the bridge remained the same, dark, moist, and slightly slick to the touch. People began pointing it out to visitors. "Watch when you cross the bridge," locals would say. "It's always wet," and it was. The first measurement, instantly the strange condition caught the attention of a group of civil engineers conducting routine inspections on regional infrastructure. One of them, a structural engineer named Laura Jensen, heard about the damp bridge during a conversation at a roadside cafe. Curious, she decided to take a closer look. At first glance, the bridge seemed completely ordinary. It had been constructed in the late 1800s using traditional stone masonry techniques. The arch carried a narrow two-lane road across a shallow stream surrounded by low grasses and trees. But the surface told a different story. While the asphalt road approaching the bridge was dry and dusty, the stone surface was noticeably darker. Laura knelt and touched it. The stones were cool and damp. Not soaked, not dripping, just persistently moist. She returned the following day during the afternoon heat. The temperature had climbed above 35 C95F, and the surrounding road had become hot enough to radiate warmth through the soles of her shoes. But the bridge was still damp. It was time to investigate more seriously. The underground leak theory's most obvious explanation seemed simple. Water must be seeping upward from underground. Perhaps an old pipe had cracked beneath the bridge. Maybe groundwater was pushing through tiny gaps in the stonework. Engineers brought equipment to test the theory. Ground-penetrating radar scanned beneath the bridge structure. Sensors measured soil moisture levels on the foundations. Specialists examined the stream below to see if hidden channels might be feeding water upward through the masonry. But the results surprised them. There was no underground leak. The stone foundations were intact, and the surrounding soil showed no unusual water flow. Moisture levels beneath the bridge were nearly identical to those measured along the nearby road. The stream itself flowed normally and set several meters below the bridge deck. No cracks or hidden pipes connected it to the surface. In other words, nothing below the bridge appeared capable of supplying the constant dampness above. The mystery deepened. Testing the stony attention then shifted to the bridge's construction materials. Unlike modern bridges made of steel and concrete, this one had been built entirely from natural stone blocks quarried from nearby hills. Some types of stone are known to absorb moisture easily. Limestone, for example, contains tiny pores that can trap water from rain or humidity. Perhaps the stones were simply holding onto moisture longer than the surrounding asphalt. To test this idea, engineers took small samples from several blocks along the edge of the bridge. Laboratory analysis revealed that the stones indeed contained microscopic pores capable of absorbing water. However, the absorption rate alone could not explain the phenomenon. Even highly porous stone typically dries within hours under strong sunlight. Yet the bridge surface remained damp day after day, even during prolonged dry weather. Something else had to be happening. The cooling effect. Another clue came from temperature measurements. Sensors placed on the bridge surface consistently recorded temperatures several degrees cooler than the surrounding pavement. This difference was noticeable even in direct sunlight. While the asphalt road absorbed heat quickly, the thick stone blocks of the bridge warmed more slowly and released heat more gradually. This meant that during hot days, the bridge remained cooler than the air around it. Cool surfaces often attract condensation, tiny droplets of water forming when warm, humid air touches something colder. But could condensation alone keep an entire bridge damp all day long? At first, engineers were skeptical. Condensation usually appears overnight or early in the morning, then evaporates once temperatures rise. Yet here the dampness seemed to persist well into the afternoon. Still, the temperature difference offered an important clue. The role of airflow for the study revealed another subtle factor. The bridge sat in a small valley where air moved differently than it did along the open road. During the day, warm air from surrounding fields drifted slowly toward the cooler stream below. As that air passed across the stone surface of the bridge, it cooled slightly. When warm, moisture-filled air cools, it releases water in the form of condensation. Under normal circumstances, sunlight would quickly dry that moisture. But the bridge's thick stones absorbed some of the water and released it slowly. Combined with the cooler surface temperature, this created a repeating cycle. 1. Warm, humid air flows over the bridge. 2. The stone cools the air slightly. 3. Condensation forms on the surface. 4. The stone absorbs and holds moisture. 5. Evaporation occurs slowly because the surface stays cool. The process repeats throughout the day. In effect, the bridge constantly recharges its own dampness. Still not the full answer, although the airflow and condensation theory explained part of the mystery. It still didn't fully account for the bridge's consistency. Why did the surrounding pavement remain dry if the air carried so much moisture? The answer appeared to lie in the difference between stone and asphalt. Asphalt heats quickly under sunlight, often becoming much warmer than the surrounding air. When warm air touches a hot surface, condensation cannot form. The stone bridge, however, behaved differently. Its mass acted like a thermal reservoir, absorbing coolness overnight and maintaining low temperatures during the day. This made it one of the few surfaces in the area capable of triggering condensation under the right conditions. In simple terms, the bridge acted like a natural cooling plate, quietly pulling moisture from the air. The mystery remains even with these explanations. Not every engineer was completely satisfied. Measurements showed that humidity levels near the stream were slightly higher than elsewhere along the road, which supported the condensation theory. But the exact balance of temperature, airflow, and stone absorption required to maintain constant dampness remained complex. Some researchers suspected additional factors might be involved, perhaps microscopic algae or biofilms on the stone surface that helped retain moisture. Others believed tiny cracks inside the stone could store water deeper within the bridge structure, slowly releasing it over time. In reality, the phenomenon likely resulted from several overlapping processes, each reinforcing the others. A local landmark over time, the bridge became something of a local curiosity. Cyclists often slowed down when crossing it, noticing the subtle change in texture under their tires. Photographers sometimes visited early in the morning when the moist stones reflected soft light from the rising sun. Despite its unusual condition, the bridge remained structurally sound. Engineers confirmed that the damp surface posed no serious danger as long as drivers exercised normal caution. For residents of the area, the bridge became a reminder that even ordinary structures can hold quiet mysteries. Not every puzzle hides something dramatic beneath it. Sometimes the explanation lies in simple physics, the way stone, air, water, and temperature interact in subtle ways over time. A bridge that breathes today, the old stone bridge still carries travelers across the stream, just as it has for more than a century. In the blazing heat of summer, when the road on either side turns pale and dusty, the bridge remains darker and slightly cool. Its stones continue their silent exchange with the air above, absorbing moisture, releasing it, and drawing it back again. To most people it looks as if the bridge is permanently wet. But in reality, it is doing something more delicate. It is breathing with the environment, quietly collecting water from the atmosphere and letting it go again, day after day. And that is why, no matter the weather, the bridge always seems damp.
The building stood at the edge of town like a forgotten sentence at the bottom of a page. Its paint had long ago peeled away, exposing grey boards that had endured decades of sun, wind, and rain. Windows were broken or boarded, the playground rusted, and weeds had swallowed the asphalt yard where children once ran in circles, chasing laughter. Most people in town simply called it the Old Schooler, place that had closed decades earlier and quietly slipped out of memory. But every weekday morning at exactly 8 a.m., something inside the building happened. A bell rang, not loudly, not clearly, just a soft, distant tone, the kind that seemed to travel through dust and empty corridors before dissolving into the morning air. It was so faint that at first most people assumed they had imagined it. Yet those who lived nearby began to notice a strange pattern. It always happened at the same time, and it only happened on weekdays. A sound no one expected. The first person to openly mention the bell was a retired mechanic named Mateo Alvarez, who lived in a small house across the road. He had moved there after retirement, drawn by the quiet streets and low cost of living. For months, he enjoyed peaceful mornings with coffee on his porch. Then one Tuesday morning, he heard it, a soft, metallic chime drifting across the yard. At first, he thought it might be a neighbor's phone alarm or a distant church bell carried by the wind. But the next morning, At exactly 8 a.m. again, the sound returned. And the morning after that, Matteo began watching his clock. Every weekday, the same thing happened. The faint ring of what sounded unmistakably like a school bell, echoing gently from the abandoned building across the street. Curiously, the sound never came on Saturday or Sunday. That detail made him uneasy. The old school had been closed for more than 30 years. Its electricity had been disconnected long ago, and the interior wiring had reportedly been stripped out during a brief renovation attempt in the 1990s. Yet something inside still behaved as if classes were about to begin. The school's quiet history. The building had once been Lincoln Elementary School. Constructed in the late 1940s, during the town's population boom after World War II, for decades it served hundreds of students from nearby neighborhoods. Teachers remembered the building fondly. It had tall windows that filled classrooms with sunlight and a playground shaded by old oak trees. Generations of children had learned their first lessons there. But by the early 1990s, enrollment had dropped sharply. A newer school opened closer to the town center, and Lincoln Elementary was eventually closed and abandoned. The bell system had once been simple. A mechanical bell in the hallway connected to an electrical timer. At 8 a.m. sharp each weekday morning, it would ring to signal the start of classes. After the school shut down, the timer was removed along with the rest of the electrical system. The building sat unused, occasionally visited by vandals or curious teenagers. By the early 2000s, even those visits became rare. The school became just another empty structure, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The sound confirmed. For years, Matteo kept his observation mostly to himself. It seemed too strange to bring up casually, but eventually curiosity got the better of him. One morning, he invited his friend Clara, a local librarian, to sit with him on the porch. "Just listen," he told her. At 7:59 a.m., they sat quietly. Birds chirped in the trees. A car passed down the road. The wind rustled through dry weeds. Then, precisely as the minute hand reached 12, the sound appeared. Ding. Soft. Metallic. Brief. Clara's eyes widened. "That's a bell," she said. The two of them walked toward the old school. But by the time they reached the front steps, the sound had faded. Inside, the building was silent, except for the creaking of loose boards and the flutter of pigeons that had made nests in the rafters. No machinery, no electricity, no obvious source. The sound had lasted only a second or two, but they had both heard it clearly. Measuring the impossible word of the strange bell slowly spread through the small community. Most residents dismissed it as exaggeration or imagination. Others suggested wind moving loose metal somewhere inside the building, but one detail remained difficult to explain. The precise timing. It happened at 8 a.m. every weekday. Eventually, a local college professor named Daniel Reed heard about the story and decided to investigate. Reed specialized in acoustic measurements and environmental sound monitoring. He brought a portable sound meter and recording equipment to the site. On a Wednesday morning, he set up the devices on Matteo's porch at 7:45 a.m. The recorder ran quietly while they waited. At exactly 8 a.m., the bell rang again. This time, the instruments captured it. Later analysis confirmed what they had heard. A short, metallic tone lasting roughly 1.7 seconds, centered around a frequency consistent with a small steel bell. Even more curious, the sound appeared to originate from inside the school building, not from any nearby structure. Reed checked local infrastructure maps. There were no active churches, factories, or public announcement systems nearby that could produce such a sound. The instruments had confirmed the bell, but not its source. Exploring the interior, a small team decided to examine the school building more carefully. They entered during daylight, moving through dusty classrooms and empty hallways. The interior looked frozen in time. Old chalkboards still hung on the walls. Faded bulletin boards displayed fragments of decades-old student projects. Desks had been removed, but outlines remained where they once stood. At the center hallway, they found the old bell housing. It was mounted high on the wall above what had once been the main office doorway. But when they opened it, the interior was empty. The bell mechanism had been removed years earlier. Only rusted mounting brackets remained. The wiring that once powered it had been completely stripped from the walls. Yet the recorded sound clearly resembled a bell almost identical to the type schools commonly used in the mid-20th century. Theories began to circulate. Some suggested that temperature changes in the morning might cause metal components somewhere in the building to expand and strike each other. Others proposed that wind passing through broken pipes or ventilation shafts might produce a bell-like tone. But these explanations struggled to account for the strict schedule. Wind and temperature do not follow. Another suggestion was that the sound might originate from far away. Carried by the air under certain atmospheric conditions, acoustic reflections can sometimes travel surprising distances. Yet Reed's recordings suggested that sound was close, not distant. The signal strength dropped rapidly when measured farther down the road, as though the source truly lay inside the abandoned structure. A pattern too perfect. Saturday and Sunday. Silence. Even during holidays, when the town was quiet, the sound still occurred if the day fell on a weekday. Rain, fog, or clear skies made no difference. The tone remained consistent, always soft, always brief, always punctual. One curious observation stood out. The bell was slightly quieter during summer months when trees were thick with leaves, and slightly louder in winter when branches were bare. Schools are places built around routine. Bells organize the rhythm of learning. Start of class, lunch, recess, dismissal. For decades, Lincoln Elementary had followed that rhythm without fail. Perhaps it wasn't surprising that something, whether mechanical, environmental, or acoustic, still echoed that schedule. From a scientific perspective, several possibilities remain plausible. One is resonant vibration. Old structures sometimes contain loose metal pieces or pipes that vibrate when struck by wind gusts or temperature shifts. If the vibration occurs at a particular frequency, it can resemble the tone of a bell. Another explanation involves acoustic reflections from distant sounds. Under certain atmospheric conditions, sound waves can bend and travel long distances before reflecting off surfaces like walls or hills. If a distant bell or metallic sound occurs somewhere else at roughly the same time each morning, the abandoned school could act as a reflector that briefly concentrates the sound. There is also the possibility of structural resonance, where a building naturally amplifies particular frequencies when exposed to environmental vibrations such as passing traffic or distant machinery. But none of these theories have yet fully explained the precise weekday timing. That detail remains the most puzzling part of the phenomenon. A quiet mystery. Today, the old school still stands, though its future is uncertain. Developers have occasionally proposed demolishing the building to make room for housing, but plans never seem to move forward. Perhaps the mystery contributes to its survival. Every weekday morning, people nearby sometimes pause and listen. And at 8 a.m., just as children once hurried through its doors decades ago, The faint metallic tone appears again. Ding, soft, briefed, almost gentle, a bell that should no longer exist, ringing inside a building that no longer teaches anyone. Whether the sound comes from hidden physics, distant echoes, or some overlooked mechanical cause, no one has yet proven exactly why it happens. But, for those who hear it, the meaning feels strangely clear. The old school may be abandoned. Its classrooms may be empty.
On a lonely country road, there's an old house. No, 7. It's been empty for decades, a skeleton of a home swallowed by time and nature. But beside the road stands its mailbox, weathered and rusted. Yet one thing about it is constant. Every single day, its little red flag is up. Rain, snow, or shine, it waits. A signal for a pickup that never comes. Who keeps raising it, and why? This is the story of the house at No. 7 and the ghost who waited. My name is Sarah, and as a local historian, some mysteries are just too compelling to ignore. The house at No. 7 was one of them. The townsfolk had their stories, of course. Whispers of a ghostly figure seen by the road at twilight. A woman in a faded dress, her hand always reaching for that little red flag. But legends are one thing, facts are another. I needed to know the truth behind the legend. My investigation started where all local history does, the town archives. Poring over dusty ledgers and brittle maps, I searched for No. 7. The records showed the property last belonged to the Vance family, and the last registered resident was a woman named Eleanor Vance. The paper trail was thin, but it was a start. The old librarian, Mr. Abernathy, remembered the name. Eleanor, he said, his voice raspy with age. Quiet woman. Kept to herself after her fiancé soldier went overseas. She was always waiting by that mailbox, waiting for a letter from him. The next clue came from a microfiche machine. Scrolling through the local newspaper archives from the early 1970s, I found small mentions of Eleanor. The mystery deepened. Had she moved away? Or did something more tragic happen? The town's police records from that year were incomplete, damaged by a flood in the 80s, but I found an old officer's logbook that had survived. In it, a brief entry from October 31st, 1974. A wellness check was called for No. 7. The officer noted the house was empty, looking as if the owner had just stepped out for a moment. A pot of tea was cold on the stove. A half-finished book lay open on the table, and outside, the mailbox flag was up. The official report concluded she had likely left town without a word, but it didn't feel right. She wouldn't abandon her post, not after waiting for so long. I visited the house again, this time with a new perspective. The overgrown garden, the peeling paint, the broken windows, it wasn't just decay, it was a shrine to waiting. I imagined Eleanor, day after day, walking down this very path, raising the flag with a hopeful heart, and returning with empty hands. The unwavering hope, the crushing disappointment, repeated for years. I realized the ghost stories weren't just stories. They were the echo of a profound love and an unbearable sorrow imprinted on this place. Eleanor wasn't just a missing person, she was a spirit trapped in a loop of expectation. The raised flag wasn't a prank or a mechanical quirk. It was her, still reaching out, still waiting for the news that would finally set her free. I knew then what I had to do. The law couldn't close this case. History couldn't close this case. Only compassion could. I went home and sat down at my desk, with a pen and a simple piece of paper. I decided to write the letter that Eleanor had waited her entire life for. It wasn't from David, of course. I couldn't forge that, but it could be from someone who understood. I wrote about David, I wrote about his bravery, his sacrifice. I told her that the war was long over, that the world had moved on, and that she didn't have to wait anymore. I told her that her devotion was a beautiful, powerful thing, a testament to a love that time couldn't erase. I told her that David would want her to be at peace, that her wait was finally over. I sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote a single name on the front: Eleanor. That evening, as dusk settled over the fields, I drove back to No. 7. The air was still and heavy. The house stood silhouetted against the purple sky, a silent, watchful giant. My heart pounded as I approached the mailbox. Just like every other day, the red flag was defiantly up. My hand trembled as I opened the little metal door. The empty space inside felt cold, cavernous. I took a deep breath and slid my letter inside. Then I gently pushed the door shut, the click echoing in the quiet twilight. I didn't touch the flag. I left it standing, one last time. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept picturing the lonely road, the mailbox, and the letter sitting inside. Was this foolish? Was I just talking to an empty house? The next morning, I had to know. I drove back, the early sun casting long shadows across the road. As I got closer, my breath caught in my throat. I slowed the car, my eyes fixed on the mailbox. The red flag was down. For the first time in almost 50 years, the flag was down. I parked the car and walked towards it, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the gravel. I felt a mix of fear and elation. With a shaking hand, I reached out and pulled open the small, creaking door. My letter was gone, but the mailbox wasn't empty. Lying there, in the exact spot where I had placed my letter, was another one. It was an old, delicate envelope, yellowed with age, the paper almost translucent. It had no stamp, no address, just a single word written in a beautiful, looping, old-fashioned script. My name, Sarah. My hands trembled as I carefully picked it up. It felt impossibly light, as if it were made of air and memory. I opened the unsealed flap. Inside was a small, single sheet of paper, folded once. I unfolded it. The same elegant handwriting filled the page. The ink faded to a pale brown. It was just 2 words: thank you. A wave of emotion washed over me: relief, sadness, and a profound sense of peace. I looked up from the note to the old, dilapidated house. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of light in an upstairs window, like a candle being gently blown out. A final goodbye. The air felt lighter. The oppressive sadness that had clung to this place seemed to have lifted, carried away on the morning breeze. I drove away from No. 7 that day, leaving the house to its quiet rest. I never went back. I didn't need to. Every time I drive down that country road now, I glance at the mailbox. Its little red flag stays down. The vigil is over. Eleanor Vance, the ghost who waited, is finally at peace. Some stories don't end with answers, but with closure. And sometimes, a simple act of kindness can reach across the years, and even across the veil between worlds, to finally bring a lost soul home. Thanks for watching.
Have you ever walked into a room and felt like something was just off? Maybe the air felt a little thicker, or the shadows played tricks on your eyes. Well, imagine that feeling, but it never goes away. Imagine it gets stronger, day by day, year by year, until you start to question your own senses. This is the story of a room that, according to the people who work there, is slowly, inexplicably closing in on itself. Our story begins in the quiet, climate-controlled depths of a large institutional archive. We can't say exactly where, to protect the identities of those involved, but it's a place dedicated to preserving history. Rows upon rows of sterile metal shelves hold countless boxes, each one a time capsule filled with paper, photographs, and the ghosts of the past. For the archivists who work here, it's a place of order and precision. Everything has its place, everything is measured, cataloged, and accounted for. This particular room, Let's call it Archive Room B7, is nothing special at first glance. It's a standard rectangular space, about the size of a small classroom, packed with rolling shelf systems. For years, it served its purpose without incident. Staff would come and go, retrieving documents, filing new acquisitions, the daily rhythm of preservation humming along. But around 15 years ago, a subtle change began. It wasn't something you could see. It was a feeling. A junior archivist, someone who spent hours each day in B7, was the first to mention it. He'd say things like, "It feels a bit tight in here today," or "Am I just imagining it?" Or "Is this all narrower than yesterday?" His colleagues would usually laugh it off. "Maybe you're just getting bigger," they joke, or "It's the paperwork piling up, makes everything feel cluttered." But the feeling persisted. Over the next few years, other staff members started to notice it too. It was a creeping, almost subconscious sensation. The space between the shelves seemed to diminish. The act of pulling out a large records box felt more awkward, requiring a little more twisting and turning than before. Some described it as feeling like the air pressure was slightly off, a gentle, constant squeeze you couldn't quite put your finger on. This collective feeling became a running joke, a piece of office folklore. "Don't get trapped to B7, a supervisor might say to a new hire. It likes to hold on to things." But beneath the jokes, a genuine sense of unease was growing. The room was starting to feel claustrophobic. The fluorescent light seemed to hum at a lower, more oppressive frequency. The perpetual chill of the climate control felt less like preservation and more like the cold of a tomb. The stories got stranger. An archivist swore she left a rolling cart in the main aisle with plenty of space to walk around it, only to return an hour later and find she had to squeeze past it sideways. Another claimed he once dropped a pen, and when he bent down to get it, the space felt so tight he almost got stuck. These were rational, detail-oriented people, not prone to flights of fancy. Their jobs revolved around facts and figures, and the fact was, the room felt smaller. Finally, after years of whispers and weird feelings, the head archivist, a pragmatic woman named Eleanor, decided to put an end to the nonsense, as she called it. She was tired of the spook stories and the effect it was having on morale. Her plan was simple. She would take precise measurements of the room and compare them to the original architectural blueprints from when the building was constructed. The numbers, she was certain, would prove that nothing had changed. The building was a modern, stable structure. Walls don't just move. So, one Tuesday morning, armed with a high-precision laser measuring tool, Eleanor and her most senior technician went into room B7. They planned to be thorough. They would measure the length, the width, and the height from multiple points, wall to wall, floor to ceiling. They pulled out the original blueprints, dated nearly to decades prior. The plans were clear. The room's interior width was specified down to the millimeter. They started with the width, the primary axis of concern. They set up the laser measure, aimed it from one concrete wall to the other, and waited for the beep. The number flashed up on the small screen. Eleanor read it, frowned, and read it again. She looked over at the blueprint, then back at the device. "Run it again," she told the technician. They did. The same number appeared. They moved to a different spot along the room's length and measured the width again. And again. Each time, the result was consistent. According to their brand new, perfectly calibrated laser measure, the room was narrower than the original plan specified. The difference wasn't huge. It wasn't a foot, or even an inch. The difference was just under 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters. Spread across the entire width of a room, it's almost nothing. It's less than the width of your thumb. In the grand scheme of a building, it's a rounding error, a construction tolerance. Eleanor's first instinct was relief. "See," she said, trying to sound confident. "It's a tiny discrepancy, probably a difference between the plan and the actual build. Nothing to worry about." But the technician, a man who had worked in the building since it opened, wasn't so sure. He remembered being there during the final construction inspections. He remembered the site manager being almost obsessive about adhering to the plans. He had a nagging feeling. He suggested they dig deeper. And this is where the story turns from a curious anomaly into something truly unsettling. They started digging through old building maintenance and survey records. They were looking for any data that could corroborate the original dimensions. And they found it, tucked away in a file from 15 years ago. Right around the time the strange feelings in the room began was a report from a routine structural survey. That survey had included a full set of measurements for the entire facility. And in that report, the width of Archive Room B7 was recorded. It matched the original architectural blueprints, exactly. Let that sink in. 15 years ago, The room's width was precisely what it was supposed to be. Today, it is 2 centimeters smaller. Over the course of 15 years, 2 centimeters of space have, for all intents and purposes, vanished. Eleanor's skepticism evaporated, replaced by a cold, professional dread. The implications were staggering. If the room was shrinking, what was causing it? The first and most obvious explanation would be structural compression. The building was settling, or the walls were bowing inward. They immediately called in a team of structural engineers. The engineers spent a week crawling all over room B7 and the surrounding structure. They used ground-penetrating radar to look for shifts in the foundation. They placed stress gauges on the walls. They used ultrasound to check the integrity of the concrete and rebar. Their conclusion was unanimous and deeply unnerving. There was nothing wrong with the building. The foundation was perfectly stable. The load-bearing columns were sound. The floor above and the foundation below were not exerting any unusual pressure. Most importantly, the walls of room B7 themselves showed absolutely no signs of movement, bowing, or compression. They were, according to every instrument and test they could throw at them, perfectly plumb and static. The walls hadn't moved, and yet the space between them had decreased. This is the heart of the mystery. It's a physical impossibility, a paradox. If two opposing surfaces get closer together, at least one of them has to have moved. But all the evidence, all the scientific data, said they hadn't. The engineers wrote up their report, declared the building structurally sound, and left, shaking their heads and muttering about measurement errors. But the archivists knew better. They had the old measurement. They had the new measurement. And they had 15 years of a creeping, shared feeling that the room was closing in. The engineer's report didn't solve the mystery. It made it infinitely more terrifying. It removed all logical, physical explanations. What's happening in Archive Room B7? To this day, no one knows. The staff have their own theories, whispered in the break room. Some believe it's a slow-motion spatial anomaly, a wrinkle in the fabric of reality localized to that one room. Others wondered if the sheer weight of all that history, all those documents and forgotten lives packed onto the shelves, is somehow compressing the space itself, not physically, but metaphysically. A few even joke that the room is breathing, and that it inhaled 15 years ago and just hasn't exhaled yet. The room is still in use, but with new protocols. No one is allowed to work in there alone for an extended period. Every year, on the same day, they take a new laser measurement of the width. For the last couple of years, the measurement has held steady. The shrinking has, for now, stopped. But every time they take that measurement, there's a collective holding of breath. What if one day it's smaller again, another millimeter gone, another piece of their reality shaved away? The story of Archive Room B7 is a perfect example of how the uncanny can intrude on our very ordered, measured world. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths aren't the ones that break the rules of physics, but the ones that seem to follow them and break them at the same time. The walls haven't moved, but the room is smaller. How do you solve a mystery when the facts themselves are a contradiction? The only thing the archivists know for sure is that somewhere in their building, there are 2 centimeters of space that are simply gone.
You know, in all my years of urban exploration, I thought I'd seen it all. I've walked through forgotten hospitals where the air is still thick with sorrow, and I've navigated the skeletal remains of factories that once hummed with life. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I found in apartment 7B. The building itself was a relic, a concrete monolith slowly surrendering to the city's relentless grip of decay. Most units were boarded up, but 7B was different. The door was slightly ajar, almost like an invitation. Whispers of lights turning on by themselves, shadows moving in empty rooms. The usual ghost stories you hear about any abandoned spot. I figured it was just local folklore, something to spook the neighborhood kids. Still, my curiosity got the better of me. Pushing the door open, a cloud of dust danced in a single beam of sunlight, cutting through the grimy window. The air was heavy and stale, the kind of silence that has weight to it. The furniture was draped in white sheets, looking like a gathering of patient ghosts. Everything was perfectly still, preserved in a layer of time and neglect. Except for one thing. A sound, a soft, rhythmic drip, drip, coming from deeper inside the apartment. It was a familiar sound, the kind you tune out in your own home. But here, in this dead space, it was the only sign of life, a tiny heartbeat in a corpse of a home. I followed the sound, my boots crunching softly on unseen debris. It led me to the bathroom. The bathroom was a time capsule of 1970s design. Avocado green tiles, a rust-stained sink. And there it was, the source of the sound. A chrome faucet, steadily leaking into the basin below. Drip, drip, drip. I almost laughed. After all the spooky stories, the big mystery was just bad plumbing. I pulled out my camera, thinking I'd just get a few atmospheric shots of the decay, the peeling wallpaper, the general sense of abandonment. I framed the faucet in my viewfinder, focusing on the way each drop formed, swelled, and then finally let go, hitting the porcelain with a soft tick. It was almost meditative. I watched for a minute, maybe two. Drop, tick, drip, drop, tick. And then it happened. A drop of water formed at the tip of the faucet, swelled to its breaking point, and fell. But just as it was about to hit the sink, it stopped. It just hung there, suspended in midair for a split second, shimmering like a tiny diamond. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing, and then it shot straight back up, rejoining the faucet with a faint, impossible little splash. I lowered my camera, blinking. Did I just see that? Was I that tired? Maybe the dust was getting to me, making my eyes play tricks. I stared at the faucet, my heart starting to thump against my ribs. Drip, drop, tick, normal. Drip, drop, tick, normal again. I must have imagined it. I raised my camera again, deciding I needed to get this on video, just in case. I had to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. I hit record, holding my breath, my eye glued to the small screen. The faucet dripped. One drop, two, three, all normal. I was about to give up, to chalk it up to a waking dream, when it happened again. A droplet fell, stopped, and then zipped right back up into the spout. This time I had it. I had it on camera. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. It was real. I zoomed in closer, my hands trembling slightly. And that's when the real show began. It wasn't just one drop anymore. Another one fell and reversed. Then two at once. They didn't just fly straight up. They began to move with a strange, fluid grace. They'd fall halfway, hover, then spiral back upwards, like tiny silver ballerinas performing a silent, liquid dance. It was mesmerizing. The steady rhythm of the drips was gone, replaced by a chaotic yet beautiful spectacle. Drops would shoot up, merge with the faucet, and then new ones would fall, only to defy gravity themselves. Some would loop around each other before ascending. It was a fountain in reverse, a silent, impossible ballet of water that broke every law of physics I knew. My fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being overshadowed by a profound sense of awe. What was I witnessing? Some kind of localized magnetic anomaly? A trick of air pressure? Or something else entirely? Something that didn't have a scientific explanation. I just kept recording, panning slowly to capture the whole bizarre phenomenon, making sure my own reflection in the grimy mirror showed my face, my expression a mixture of pure shock and utter fascination. This was the explorer's jackpot, the kind of thing you dream of finding but never, ever expect to. The dance of the water droplets continued for what felt like an eternity, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. It was utterly silent, save for my own ragged breathing. There was no hum, no energy field I could feel, just this impossible, beautiful violation of nature. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The last ascending drop rejoined the faucet, and the familiar, mundane rhythm returned. Drip, drop, tick, as if nothing had ever happened. I stood there for a long time, just staring, my camera still in my hand. The moment was gone. I tried to coax it back, tapping the sink, waving my hand through the air. Nothing. It was just a normal, leaky faucet in a forgotten apartment again. I backed out of the bathroom slowly, a feeling of reverence washing over me. I didn't explore the rest of the apartment. It felt wrong somehow. I had seen what I was meant to see. I quietly closed the door to 7B behind me, leaving the apartment to its secrets once more. When I got home, I watched the footage over and over. It was all there, clear as day. No glitch, no editing trick. Just pure, unexplainable reality. I uploaded the video, of course. I had to. It went viral almost overnight. People called it a hoax, a brilliant piece of CGI. Physicists tried to explain it with theories about acoustics and standing waves. Paranormal investigators called it a poltergeist, but no one could ever truly explain it, and no one ever saw it again. Other explorers went to apartment 7B, drawn by my video. They set up cameras for days, for weeks. All they ever recorded was the steady, monotonous drip of a leaky faucet. It was a one-time performance, and I was the only audience. It remains the single most profound and mysterious experience of my life, a private miracle in a dusty, forgotten room that reminds me that no matter how much we think we know about this world, there are still corners where the impossible can happen. Thanks for joining me on this look back. Stay curious. In the quiet suburbs of North America lies a street unlike any other. On the surface, it's completely ordinary. Same manicured lawns, same cookie-cutter houses. But this street, known as Maple Lane, holds a strange secret. It is consistently, without fail, 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding area. Scientists have been baffled for years. They've tested for geothermal anomalies, unusual building materials, even strange electrical outputs. Nothing. Every test comes back normal. We spoke to residents, people who have lived there for decades. They report nothing out of the ordinary. Life is peaceful, quiet, almost unnaturally so. Some mentioned their gardens seem to flourish a little better, or that snow melts just a fraction faster on their driveways, but they'd never given it much thought. There are no power lines overhead, no hidden industrial pipes below. It's just warmer. It's a phenomenon without an explanation, a tiny pocket of warmth in an otherwise predictable world. The data doesn't lie, but it offers no answers. What could be generating this constant, gentle heat? Some speculate it's a glitch in our reality, a place where the laws of physics are just slightly different. Whatever the cause, Maple Lane remains a quiet, suburban mystery, leaving us to wonder what other secrets might be hiding right under our feet. What do you think is going on? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.
This old courthouse has stood for over a century, a silent witness to countless stories. But within its walls, one mystery has remained locked away, literally. It all centers around this desk, a forgotten relic in a dusty corner of the clerk's office. For as long as anyone can remember, its top right drawer has been sealed shut. no one has the key. No one knows what's inside. The building's archives offer tantalizing clues. Look at this photo from the 1920s. There's the desk, right behind Judge Abernathy. He was known for his stern demeanor, but also for his peculiar habits. Local lore says he was the last person to use this desk regularly. And then there's this entry in an old ledger from 1938, a few years after the judge retired. It simply reads, "Desk drawer, secured. Key, misplaced." Misplaced or intentionally hidden? We've talked to town historians and descendants of courthouse employees. One story that keeps coming up is about Judge Abernathy and a controversial case he presided over just before his retirement. It involved a land dispute between two prominent families, a case that supposedly tore the community apart. Some people whisper that the judge locked away evidence, something he couldn't bring himself to destroy, but couldn't bear to see the light of day. Others say it's just a time capsule, filled with personal mementos from his long career. The not knowing has become its own legend. For decades, the drawer has resisted all attempts. Custodians have tried their master keys. Maintenance crews have jiggled it, pulled it. It felt like desecrating a piece of history. The mystery was more valuable than whatever could possibly be inside. But today, that changes. After getting special permission from the County Historical Society, we're finally going to solve this. We've brought in a specialist, a master locksmith named Arthur, who has a passion for antique locks. He's not just here to break it open. He's here to understand it. He's looking at the lock now, examining the craftsmanship. He says it's a high-quality pin tumbler lock from the early 20th century. A serious piece of security for its time. He's going to try to pick it first to preserve the integrity of the desk. He believes brute force should be the absolute last resort. Arthur is laying out his tools, an array of tension wrenches and delicate picks. It's quiet in here now, just the faint click and scrape of metal on metal. You can feel the anticipation in the room. Every person here is holding their breath. This isn't just about opening a drawer. It's about unlocking a piece of the town's hidden past. He's been working on it for about 20 minutes now. He stops, wipes his brow, and studies the lock again. He says it's a tricky one. The pins are worn in an unusual way, suggesting it was used frequently and then suddenly, not at all. He's trying a different pick now, a slightly different angle. The silence is heavy. It's almost as if the desk itself is fighting back, refusing to give up its secret. He's muttering to himself, feeling for that tiny shear point, that one moment where all the pins align. Click. Was that it? No, a false set. This is a game of patience, a conversation between the locksmith and the lock. The judge clearly didn't want this opened easily. We're all leaning in closer. It's been nearly an hour. The Historical Society director looks nervous, maybe regretting her decision. What if there's nothing inside? What if the mystery was better than the reality? Wait, Arthur just froze. He's turning the tension wrench with infinitesimal pressure. There's a sound, a solid, definitive thunk. It's a sound no one in this room has ever heard from this desk. He did it. He actually picked the lock. He's slowly, carefully pulling his tools out. He looks at us and nods. It's open. The drawer handle, untouched for 80 years, is now ready to be pulled. Who should do the honors? It feels right that the Historical Society director should be the one. She steps forward, her hands trembling just a little. She places her fingers on the old brass handle. The air is electric. This is it. She pulls. The drawer groans in protest, scraping against the aged wood. It's stiff from decades of stillness. She pulls harder, and it slides open. Everyone crowds around, peering into the dark space. What did Judge Abernathy lock away with such determination? Is it evidence? A confession? Gold coins. We all lean in, our eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. The first thing we see is a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover is worn smooth. Beside it, there isn't a stack of documents or a bag of money. Instead, there's a child's drawing, faded but still vibrant, of a simple house with a smiling sun above it. And next to that, a single, perfectly preserved pressed flower of forget-me-not. The director carefully lifts out the journal. Her hands are shaking as she opens it to the first page. The handwriting is elegant, deliberate. It's Judge Abernathy's. She begins to read aloud. The entries aren't about legal cases or town disputes. They're letters. Letters to his son, who passed away from an illness as a young boy. The judge writes to him every day, telling him about his life, his hopes, his regrets. He talks about the pressures of his job, the difficult decisions he had to make. The controversial land dispute case is mentioned, but only in the context of his own moral struggle. His wish to be a good man, a man his son would have been proud of. The drawer wasn't a vault for a town secret. It was a private sanctuary for a grieving father. He locked it, not to hide a crime from the world, but to protect his most vulnerable feelings, his conversations with the son he'd lost. The last entry is dated the day of his retirement. He wrote that he was closing this chapter of his life and entrusting these memories to time. The misplaced key suddenly makes sense. Perhaps he lost it on purpose, a final act of letting go. There was no grand conspiracy, no hidden treasure. There was just a story of love, loss, and a father's quiet heartbreak. The truth wasn't a shocking revelation that would rock the town, but something far more profound and universally human. We came here looking for a mystery and found a lesson in empathy. Sometimes, the greatest secrets are not the ones we keep from others, but the ones we keep for ourselves. This desk, once a symbol of a forgotten puzzle, is now a monument to a father's enduring love. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Sometimes history isn't about the big events, but about the quiet, personal stories hidden just beneath the surface. If you found this as moving as we did, please like this video and subscribe for more explorations into the forgotten corners of our world. We'll see you next time.
The White House is one of the most recognizable buildings in the world, a symbol of power, leadership, and American democracy. Its white columns and carefully maintained lawns project an image of stability and control. Yet behind its polished facade lies a long history not just of politics and decision-making, but of mystery, whispers, and encounters that many believe defy explanation. For over 2 centuries, presidents, first ladies, staff members, and guests have reported strange occurrences within its walls. Among these accounts, one figure appears more frequently than any other: the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. The idea that the White House could be haunted may sound like folklore or imagination, but the consistency of reports across decades gives the story a peculiar weight. These are not tales passed down by anonymous storytellers alone. They come from respected figures, including heads of state, military personnel, and international visitors. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, the sheer number of similar experiences invites curiosity. The White House was completed in 1800, and since then it has witnessed some of the most dramatic moments in American history: wars, assassinations, economic crises, and sweeping social changes. It is perhaps no surprise that such an emotionally charged place might carry echoes of the past. Buildings that have endured centuries often accumulate stories, but the White House is unique because of the prominence of those who have lived and worked there, and the intensity of the events they experienced. Of all the spirits said to inhabit the residence, Abraham Lincoln is the most famous. Lincoln served as president during one of the darkest periods in American history, the Civil War. His leadership preserved the Union, but at tremendous cost: hundreds of thousands of lives lost and a nation deeply divided. In 1865, shortly after the war's end, Lincoln was assassinated, shocking the country and leaving a profound sense of unfinished business in the national consciousness. It is this sense of unfinished duty that many believe explains why Lincoln's spirit is said to linger in the White House. According to numerous accounts, his presence is not hostile or frightening in the traditional sense. Instead, it is often described as solemn, watchful, even burdened, as though he remains tied to the responsibility he once carried. One of the most frequently cited sightings involves a tall, shadowy figure standing near a window, gazing outward. Witnesses describe the silhouette as unmistakably Lincoln, tall, thin, with a distinctive posture. Sometimes the figure appears briefly before vanishing. Other times it seems to linger long enough to leave a lasting impression on those who see it. Perhaps one of the most famous witnesses was First Lady Grace Coolidge, who lived in the White House during the presidency of Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s. She reportedly saw Lincoln standing at a window in what is now known as the Lincoln bedroom, looking out across the Potomac River. According to her account, there was no sense of fear, only a quiet awareness that she was witnessing something extraordinary. Other reports are more unsettling. Some visitors have claimed to hear footsteps echoing through empty corridors late at night, long after the building has fallen silent. Staff members working overnight shifts have described doors opening and closing on their own, or hearing faint knocking sounds with no clear source. In some cases, individuals have reported the sensation of being watched, even when they were alone. One particularly intriguing story involves Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, who stayed at the White House during a visit in the 1940s. According to the account, she was awakened in the middle of the night by a knock on her bedroom door. When she opened it, she reportedly saw Abraham Lincoln standing there. Startled, she fainted. While skeptics question the accuracy of this story, it remains one of the most widely repeated tales associated with the White House ghost. Even prominent political figures have acknowledged strange experiences. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister during World War II, is said to have encountered Lincoln's ghost during his stay. According to legend, Churchill had just stepped out of a bath and was smoking a cigar when he noticed Lincoln standing by the fireplace. Churchill, known for his wit, reportedly said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." After that, the apparition disappeared. Whether or not these stories are entirely accurate, they reflect a recurring theme. Lincoln's presence is often associated with moments of crisis or reflection. Some believe his spirit appears during times of national stress, as though he is still watching over the country he fought to preserve. The Lincoln bedroom itself has become the focal point of many of these reports. Originally used as a cabinet room during Lincoln's presidency, it was later converted into a bedroom. Today, it is considered one of the most haunted spaces in the building. Guests who have stayed there sometimes report vivid dreams, strange noises, or a lingering sense that they are not alone. But Lincoln is not the only spirit said to inhabit the White House. Over the years, reports have surfaced of other ghostly figures, including former First Lady Abigail Adams, who is said to haunt the East Room. During her time in the White House, Adams used the large space to hang laundry, and witnesses have claimed to see a figure resembling her moving through the room, arms outstretched as if carrying linens. Another frequently mentioned presence is Andrew Jackson, the 7th president, whose spirit is reportedly heard laughing or swearing in what was once his bedroom. These accounts add to the sense that the White House is not just a single ghost story, but a collection of lingering echoes from different eras. Skeptics, of course, offer alternative explanations. Old buildings often produce unusual sounds: creaking floors, shifting pipes, drafts moving through hidden spaces. The White House, with its age and constant modifications, is especially prone to such phenomena. Psychological factors may also play a role. When individuals know they are in a place associated with history and legend, their perceptions may be influenced by expectation and suggestion. Yet even with these explanations, some aspects of the stories remain difficult to dismiss entirely. The consistency of descriptions, particularly of Lincoln's appearance, raises questions. Why do so many people, from different backgrounds and time periods, report seeing a similar figure in similar locations? Another factor to consider is the emotional weight carried by the White House. It is not just a residence. It is a place where decisions are made that affect millions of lives. The stress, responsibility, and historical significance embedded in its walls create an atmosphere unlike any other building. Some researchers suggest that intense human experiences can leave an imprint on a location, a kind of residual energy that manifests in subtle ways. For those who have experienced something unusual, the explanation matters less than the feeling itself. Many describe their encounters not as terrifying, but as deeply moving. Seeing Lincoln, even as an apparition, can feel like a connection to history, a reminder of the struggles and sacrifices that shaped the nation. In this sense, the legend of the White House ghost serves a larger purpose. It keeps history alive in a way that facts and dates alone cannot. It transforms the past into something immediate and tangible, something that can still be felt in the present. Today, the White House continues to function as the center of American political life. Presidents come and go, each leaving their mark on the building and the country. But alongside the official business and public appearances, the stories persist quietly passed from one generation to the next. Late at night, when the lights are dim and the halls are empty, it is easy to imagine a tall figure standing by a window, looking out into the darkness. Whether this figure is truly the spirit of Abraham Lincoln or simply a product of imagination and memory is something no one can say with certainty, but perhaps that uncertainty is part of what makes the story so enduring. The White House is more than a building. It is a living symbol of history, filled with echoes of those who came before. And among those echoes, the presence of Abraham Lincoln, real or imagined, remains one of the most compelling mysteries of all.
As the United States struggled under the weight of the Great Depression, a darker crisis unfolded in Cleveland. The unknown perpetrator would earn a name that still evokes dread. The Cleveland Torso Murderer, also known as the Torso Killer. In September 1935, two boys made a horrifying discovery. Not far away, investigators found the upper portion, but the head was missing. The victim was never identified. What made the discovery even more disturbing was the precision of the dismemberment. The body had been cleanly cut, suggesting a degree of skill and anatomical knowledge, pointing to something far more sinister than a crime of passion. At first, authorities hoped this was an isolated incident. Fear remains scattered across various locations in and around the city. Some were discovered in vacant lots, others in wooded areas, and several near the impoverished shantytowns, known as the Cleveland Flats. In nearly every case, the killer had removed the head and sometimes the limbs, making identification extremely difficult. Many of those targeted were transient individuals, drifters, laborers, and people living on the margins of society. Their anonymity made them vulnerable, and the killers seemed to exploit this fact, choosing victims whose disappearances might go unnoticed. As the body count rose, pressure mounted on law enforcement. The investigation eventually came under the direction of Elliot Ness. Ness was appointed Public Safety Director of Cleveland and was widely respected for his determination and integrity. If anyone could solve the case, many believed it would be him. Ness approached the investigation with relentless energy. Several victims had been decapitated while still alive or shortly after death, indicating a level of brutality that shocked even seasoned investigators. Possum 2. Delay decomposition or obscure evidence. The lack of identification for many victims hindered progress, as did the limited forensic technology available in the 1930s. Fingerprinting, dental records, and blood analysis were used where possible, but without heads or hands. Even these methods had limitations. The geographical spread of the bodies suggested that the murderer was familiar with the city and its surroundings, leading investigators to theorize about the killer's profession. One of the most infamous locations was the Kingsbury Run area. Over the course of the investigation, authorities identified at least a dozen victims, though some estimates suggest the true number may be higher. Among them were both men and women, ranging in age and background. A few were eventually identified through painstaking detective work, but many remained nameless, known only by grim labels such as John Doe or Jane Doe. One of the most compelling suspects emerged during the investigation, though he was never formally charged. This individual was a well-connected doctor with a history of mental instability and a fascination with surgery. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence and the man's influential connections, no charges were filed. The suspect later died under mysterious circumstances, taking any secrets he may have had with him. Messias. The murders seemed to stop as suddenly as they had begun. By the early 1940s, no new victims were discovered. This abrupt end only deepened the mystery. Had the killer died, been imprisoned for another crime, or simply moved on to a different city? Some investigators and historians believe the latter is possible. While these connections remain speculative, they raise the unsettling possibility that the torso killer's story did not end in Cleveland. The psychological profile of the killer has been the subject of extensive analysis. The choice of victims points to a calculated strategy designed to minimize risk. The removal of heads and limbs suggests an effort to avoid identification. Advances in forensic science, such as DNA analysis, have provided new tools. Many pieces of evidence have been lost, degraded, or contaminated, and the lack of identifiable remains continues to pose a significant obstacle. The victims, many of whom lived and died without recognition, serve as a somber reminder of the human cost behind the headlines. And the killer, a figure without a face, without a name, without closure. Whether he disappeared into obscurity, met an unrecognized end, or continued his crimes elsewhere, no one can say for certain. What is clear is that his actions left an indelible mark not only on the city of Cleveland, but on the broader story of criminal investigation. Nearly a century later, the question still lingers, as chilling as ever. Who was the torso killer?